I know I seem like a broken record at this point, but the Snow White situation is getting much, much worse. And I know it doesn't seem like that's even possible, but when it comes to the opening box office, this thing is cratering. And we are still 3 weeks away from this movie. What's Disney going to do? Is there any way to recover? We need to talk about it. Here we go. And now, before we get started, just a real quick reminder, I'm on my way to 100K. So if you showed up here, you've probably been here before, please make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. It's absolutely free. It'll always be free on my channel, and it'll give you the opportunity to not miss anything, since I do a lot of videos during the course of the week, plus multiple live streams, as many as 6 or 7 every single week. So you don't want to miss that. So go ahead and subscribe, turn on the notifications bell, and while you're down there, hit the thumbs up button, because you know you're going to like this one. Now, let's talk Rachel Zegler. So just a couple of weeks ago, just about 3 weeks ago, Snow White hit the long lead tracking, which means that the box office experts have kind of carved out where this thing is going to start, finish, and probably what its entire box office return will be. It's not necessarily always accurate. Sometimes movies go way longer than they anticipate. Sometimes they earn way more. Those are usually called sleepers. But for things where there's a lot of money invested, where films have cost an extraordinary amount, the tent poles, those are supposed to be the big winners, especially for big companies like Disney. Well, in the case of Snow White, they spent too much and they're going to get too little. And according to this article from Deadline, their long lead tracking will mean that the live action classic will be whistling an unhappy tune, unlike this article from Anthony D'Alessandro. Anthony, you've been slipping lately, bro. You got to take off the shield glasses. So let's start here. Remake is a stretch. This movie is a remake of nothing. This is a completely new idea and twist on Snow White, which is why it's more like Snow White Warrior Princess than it is like the family classic of 1937. We got a harsh delivery of that news from Rachel Zegler herself on the Variety red carpet with our friend Gal Gadot, who seems to be able to know what to say, even when Rachel Zegler's saying the wrong thing. From the word go, as I said, remake doesn't apply, and March 21st, we're going to find out exactly why. The Quorum report says the 3-day start for the Mark Webb directed movie is going to be $63 to $70 million when it opens. Well, at least that's what they were thinking back then, because things have changed, and we'll get there in just a second. They think $65 million at this point in time is fair. I disagree. As a comp, the 2014, and mind you, the financial situation across, well, everywhere, is going to tell you that these numbers will not apply. 2014's Sleeping Beauty live action spinoff was $69.4 million. Yes, in 2014. If they're comparing 2014 dollars to what those dollars are worth now, then they're in big, big trouble. And again, just 3 short weeks ago, they were saying that awareness is solid among women over and under 35. In regards to those willing to pay to see the movie in the theater, women under 35 are first, followed by women over 35, and then men under 35 per Quorum. Of course, this targets ladies directly, but that may be the only thing going for it, because men are only going to see this, like myself, to probably do reviews or break this film down, because this film will be broken down just by the girl power that it's going to exhibit. And look, I mean, I'm going to get some thrills out of being able to point out and say, told you so, told you so, told you so. And also look at the schadenfreude of everybody else who was agreeing with me. Completely worthless services like Relish Mix or Parrot Analytics are going to say this thing has lots of buzz. 279 million followers is what Relish Mix is predicting will eventually follow on this, and that's with no X or Instagram so far, because apparently social media is the only way that this film's going to earn any money. Now, mind you, everything I just read is 3 weeks ago. Let's take a look at some of the things that may have changed. Now, in the interim, on February 21st, mind you, that was not that long ago, Disney goes back to the beginning with Snow White coming to us from Box Office Pro, at least their podcast. And they lost a very valuable person, Box Office Theory, which is a great place to go if you're looking for some pinpoint numbers. But I think even those are going to be adjusted by the time we see this in just a few weeks. And in looking at this, you can see they're of the same mind, looking at a 65 to 85 million domestic open, using Mufasa, which is a terrible example, as another reimagined live action film. And Mufasa wasn't anything of the sort. It was basically a destructive take on what it took to get The Lion King where it was. What's more, Disney's Snow White will be even more destructive. I'm not going to buy any of this, and I don't care that Greta Gerwig is the one that wrote it. I also don't care that the comparatives that they're using here are not applicable at all. I think it's funny that this is where they went with this idea, but The Lion King's 2019 numbers do not apply. The domestic total at the end of the day was 543 million, and the only thing that could be close to 543 million is maybe the budget for Snow White when you add their ads and print. That's right, their advertising or marketing budget, which is going to also be high. And mind you, this film has been shot twice plus, much like another recent flop for Disney, Captain America Brave New World. And we're looking at kind of a false prediction based on some numbers that, again, not applicable. In fact, if you want something to compare it to, take a look at Pete's Dragon. 21.5 million domestic open. If you adjust that for inflation, that's probably more like it. But here's where the real disaster shows up. And look, it's brought to us by our friends over there at That Park Place and Marvin Montanaro, who has been riding up a storm lately and getting it absolutely right. Disney's Snow White box office projections plunge even lower as the House of Mouse braces for looming, that's a great way to describe it, Rachel Zegler financial disaster. Because that's what it is, that's what it will be, and this is going to be a rough March for Disney. From the story, just when it seemed like the box office outlook for Snow White couldn't get any worse, new projections indicate that the film is set to open even lower than initially expected. According to a leading Hollywood research firm, the live-action remake is now tracking for a $53 million opening weekend. Now, mind you, that's just splitting the difference here, because the news is worse than that. They are actually projecting the range between 48 million and 58 million. This is a significant drop from earlier forecasts, which had it projected at 63 to 70 million. These numbers are not getting better. They're supposed to be more aligned with reality by the time we get close to release date. The only thing they can hope for is for this to jump up somehow, and I just don't expect that. With just 3 weeks to March 21st release, Disney's final marketing push is now in full swing. But whether it can change the trajectory remains to be seen. A disastrous financial outlook. Well, of course it is. The official budget for Snow White has been reported at 200 million plus. Well, not if you do the math and pay attention to what you get in the UK as far as releases. The insiders are suggesting the real cost is well over 300 million. Well, of course it is. And that's due to extensive reshoots and production delays. That means Snow White would need to earn upwards of 800 million globally just to break even. That's a feat that now looks increasingly unlikely. And if you actually pay attention to what's been happening with Disney-related projects, well, they're not doing so well. You have enormous spend that's not represented by the published budgets, which we now know are almost always inaccurate, and or the marketing costs that something like this, a definite disaster, is going to try to dump in to maybe squeeze out a break even. I'm going to say this, Snow White's not going to break even. For comparison, here from the article, The Little Mermaid in 2023 debuted to a 95.6 million domestic opening. Now, mind you, this is a film that not a lot of people were interested in, and if that would include me. In fact, it interested not very many people around the globe, which is another big problem. Now, that film struggled to turn a meaningful profit. I would say it didn't at all, but hey, that's something to quibble about if you really want to in the comments down below. But 569.6 million worldwide did not make this thing a dollar. This film had all kinds of issues and needed a lot of work and a lot of post work that I don't think they covered. In fact, I would say that they're probably a little bit underwater from this film. Cinderella in 2015, one of the ones that they used in the first story that we went through, opened to $67 million at the time, when tickets were far cheaper and the economy was much better. Oh, and you really didn't have to pay that much when it came to movies, nor for the snacks that went along with them. And to make matters worse, as our good friend Marvin says, Disney's marketing approach for this film has been incredibly inconsistent, which is a huge red flag if you pay attention to the industry. First, they position the film as a reinvention, which is actually what it is. It is Snow White in name only. And we've been saying that about a lot of things that have been neo-Marxist coming out of Disney, and this is right at the top of that list. But they started to backpedal in recent months by leaning heavily on nostalgia, giving you a lot of animated clips alongside things that look somewhat similar to the 1937 official footage that, would have made you think that this might be the original Snow White. It isn't. And of course, it is not without its controversies, because you still have Rachel Zegler, who was only recently receiving media coaching, at least according to the recent interview that she did, and doesn't quite understand what all the vitriol is, trying to explain it away by saying that it was the people who viewed the character passionately that were reacting to her ignorance and silliness. But the problem is, as you can see here in the article, is that people associate the new Snow White with Rachel Zegler, who has a negative reputation at this point, and not the social media following that somebody like her, who keeps getting these roles, should have. In fact, there are basically fewer people following her on Instagram than somebody like, let's say, Ryan Cannell. Okay, maybe that's not entirely true, but she doesn't have that many followers in comparison to other starlets out there who are constantly getting work for no reason, like Zendaya. And yes, I meant that. From the beginning, her casting drew attention. Of course it did. She is not Snow White. He is not white as snow. She is not this character. But it was her own comments that did the most damage. Zegler made headlines for calling the 1937 film dated and dismissing the prince as a stalker. Stalker. She also made it clear that this Snow White would not have a love story. It has a little of love interest, but nothing that I would call burning up. And she's saying her version of the character wouldn't be dreaming about true love. No, of course not. But instead, focusing on leadership. Well, yeah, cultural revolution, kids. Just go out, get your brown shirts and your whisk broom mustaches, and get to work. You have capitalism to defeat. The attempt to reframe the classic story as something completely different rubbed longtime Disney fans the wrong way. Well, that would include me, and maybe you, and possibly you. In her most recent interview, she tried to pull the corporate speak lines like, Disney has found this beautiful and delicate balance between the animated classic that everyone knows and loves from 1937, and at the same time introduces it to this new generation. Let me say this, she does not love the original animated classic at all, and said so. She also didn't enjoy the ride until, she got this role and had to. This change in messaging comes across as a transparent PR move aimed at repairing the damage done by her previous remarks, which it won't do, because people like me will continue to remind everybody that this is a terrible person. Because, she is. She's selfish and narcissistic and oblivious to the world around her, including her co-star, who was in the, say it with me, IDF. Oh, and also a mother, which I don't know if Rachel Zegler will ever do. Maybe, but remember, she doesn't want to be a supporter of the patriarchy. And of course, there's more. They're trying to get very far away from Zegler as the marketing has continued to shift away from her, and they seem to be aware that Zegler is not the most effective face for Snow White. This has been covered in a lot of different articles, not only on That Park Place, but elsewhere. And the studio has reduced her presence in trailers, cutting her screen time by nearly 50%, and during reshoots introduced another younger actress playing a young her who might actually end up with a bigger career. Yes, I know, seems odd. But of course, shills to the rescue, and Marvin points out that the week opening of $35 million for Mufasa the Lion King ended up with it earning $700 million worldwide. But after marketing and expense, that $700 million would turn out to be a little bit closer to $360 million in the take that Disney got, which did not cover the cost of production and advertising. Disney's got real problems. Wow. And as pointed out here, Mufasa had the advantage of being the sequel to a billion-dollar hit and had little competition after so many weeks being in the box office. This is something that's been happening frequently now, films earning more than they deserve because they don't have any competition. With a total of 35 films during the course of most weekends, in the last few especially, there just isn't competition out there to go for a big 4-quadrant audience like Mufasa would have had. I don't know that Snow White's going to have that same kind of pull, despite the fact that Greta Gerwig is involved, and despite the fact that it seems to be doing with young and old women alike. And as Marvin points out, Snow White does not have that luxury of having, well, something to compare it to, at least not recently, and it will be no comparison when you look back at the original 1937 classic, much like The Little Mermaid having not a whole lot of resemblance to the original film. This movie, however, has widespread public skepticism, massive dislike ratios on YouTube in the millions, and a leading actress who has alienated core audiences to the point where she couldn't even earn back the budget on a low-budget Y2K/horror film, which wasn't good, and neither was its marketing. But on the positive side, the Snow White press tour is about to begin. Giving Rachel Zegler a live microphone every day for a few weeks is unlikely to help. And I think, Marvin, you nailed that. Nobody seems to like this young lady, and it's basically all her fault. The narcissism and the lack of challenge in her life and life experiences seems to point to the fact that she just doesn't know what she's saying at any moment because she doesn't have the background to even begin discussing it. But the worst news is this could effectively limit the number of projects that Disney does in the future, especially in the live action area, because this one isn't going to pay off for sure, and there are others on the horizon that may be challenged as well. Not to mention the fact that their Marvel IP has been falling apart with poor direction, and they just can't seem to crack a good Star Wars product, and we've been waiting now for 6 years. 2025 is likely to be shot with future Marvel projects because they all look terrible. Although Thunderbolts could come in there with a good break even, the forward look at Fantastic Four is a little less optimistic, which means they got nothing until 2026. I have a feeling Disney's cinema revenues this year are going to be down. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the die has been cast. We just don't know what the results are as of yet. Will Disney stay alive with a field bet, or will they crap out and lose everything? Don't know, but I think it's going to be rather exciting. But hey, what do you think? Are we going to see Disney's Snow White numbers drop even lower for the domestic opening? Do you think somehow international numbers will save it? Is this film somehow going to turn into a hidden gem? Or did the disrespect to the original property doom this thing forever? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And while you're down there, do be sure to hit the thumbs up button. Any comment is appreciated, even if it's just, hey. And it does seem to drive the audience in the early hours of the video release. So do me a favor, hit the thumbs up, make a comment. And until next time, be sure to take care of yourself, take care of others, and I'll be back on Saturday. See ya. For real.